The processed and red meat you eat could give you cancer. That's what the World Health Organization says. But those in the meat industry and some scientists are questioning the findings. So how did the WHO reach its conclusions? And should we stop eating processed meat? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, that hot dog you love, that steak you crave, may not be the healthiest thing for you. Nothing new there, you might say. But now, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, has released its report on the link between processed meat, red meat, and cancer. The WHO classified processed meats as cancer-causing. It is the result of a year-long research which now puts processed meats in the same category as smoking or being exposed to asbestos, and it classified red meat as probably carcinogenic to humans. But it says the risk rises with the amount of processed meat people eat every day. In some developing countries where cheap meats make up a large part of many people's diets, these findings are worrying many. We'll get to our panel in a moment, but first, Al Jazeera's Wayne Hay sets up our discussion from Bangkok.
For some people, the perception of meat may have changed forever. That's because the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, has classified processed meat as a cancer-causing substance. It says if you eat 50 grams of processed meat a day, it'll increase the chances of you developing cancer of the colon by 18%. In countries like Thailand, where cheap but convenient meatballs and sausages are a large part of many people's diet, it's a concerning development.
In the morning, we have to hurry to go to somewhere, so parents tend to find something easy for children to eat. So this might be the cause of they eat sausage or processed meat every day.
Processed meat is preserved by adding chemicals, salt or smoking it. It's now placed here among a list of things that are definitely carcinogenic to humans, according to the World Health Organization. It rates alongside the likes of asbestos because of the process that the meat is put through. And red meat, including beef, lamb and pork, is in the next list of things that probably cause cancer, like herbicides, lead compounds, malaria, fumes from fried food and working night shifts. Before the official announcement, the meat industry in the US spoke out to try to discredit the findings.
It's IARC's job to find cancer hazards, but the body of scientific evidence shows that red and processed meat can be part of a healthy, balanced diet.
This is not the first time that certain types of meat have been linked to cancer, but consumption of meat is increasing around the world. According to the United Nations, it went up by 25% in the 10 years from 2003.
This report focuses on the ingredients and compounds that are found in meat. What it doesn't focus on are any other lifestyle choices that people who eat a lot of meat might also be making.
The WHO classifications help governments around the world find ways of making their populations healthier. Controversial as it is, this report will give them plenty to consider. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Well, Dana Loomis is from the International Agency for Research on Cancer, who compiled the report. He says it's the level of risk associated with carcinogenic substances that's important.
The IARC working group concluded that processed meat, that is, the consumption of processed meat, is carcinogenic to humans, and that the consumption of red meat is probably carcinogenic to humans. Processed meat has been classified as carcinogenic along with other well-known substances, including tobacco smoking and asbestos, even air pollution. But it's important to recognize that those classifications relate to the strength of scientific evidence for carcinogenicity and not to the level of risk. So even though they're all in the same category, the level of risk for tobacco smoking, say, is much larger than the risk associated with eating meat, 10 times larger than the risk for processed meat, for example.
So lots to talk about there. Let's bring in our guest. Joining me here in Doha is Chef Hannes Tinniger, Austrian chef and a food expert. In the French city of Lyon, Dr. Kurt Strafe. an epidemiologist and head of the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And joining us via Skype from Sydney, Darren Saunders, Senior Lecturer at the School of Medical Sciences at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And Darren specialises in cancer development and progression. So good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Dr. Strafe, if I could start with you then, since you're one of the people involved with putting together this report. Just talk to us about how you arrived at these conclusions and what exactly is it about red and processed meats that you believe may cause cancer?
Well, the Monographs program does regularly evaluations on what we know if certain exposures could cause cancer in humans. And about a year ago, we have started to prepare an evaluation for consumption of red meat and processed meat. That typically starts with the identification of the world's leading experts on a given topic, but at the same time also ensuring that they don't have any links to any stakeholders on the industry side or on advocacy groups on the other side. And then starts the year-long review of all the published literature on the topic. And this then culminates in an 8-day meeting in Lyon, where the experts discuss across their disciplines all the evidence accumulated and then come up with a conclusion and evaluation of the carcinogenic hazard, meaning is there a cancer risk in humans or not. And they have concluded indeed that consumption of processed meat is now a group 1 IARC carcinogen, meaning that there is sufficient evidence, at least with one type of cancer in humans, and in this case it's the cancer of the colorectum. For the red meat, there was also strong evidence for the colorectal cancer link, but not as strong and not as conclusive yet. Therefore, this was placed in the category 2A, probably carcinogenic. Now, with regard to your second question on what is causing this increase in cancer, this is not as conclusive yet. There are certain types of chemical classes that are found in different types of processed meat or also in cooked red meat, and they could all perhaps contribute to this increased risk in cancer, but the published literature does not yet allow it to clearly disentangle what is at the cause of the increased risk of cancer.
I know a lot of people will be glad to hear you to say that the cause is not conclusive, and I'm going to turn to Dr. Darren Saunders for his view on that. When you get beyond all of the kind of big headlines and people see the words cancer and meat in the same sentence, this does need a bit of perspective, doesn't it? Just walk us through that.
Yeah, I guess it's a sort of topic that's fraught. People see this classification of something they eat. A lot of people, that's something they eat every day, at least weekly, and they see it ranked up there with asbestos and smoking. And they get rightly concerned about that. And I think there's a little bit of message getting lost between the difference between level of evidence and the level of relative risk. And that rightly confuses an important public health message that needs to be out there.
So what do you think? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Also, one of the difficulties of this is that we're basing a lot of what we're talking about here on a one-page press release and a two-page very short summary of the research. So it's very hard to actually dig in deep into this research because it hasn't actually been published yet, which is quite difficult from a researcher's perspective.
All right, well, we'll hopefully get a little bit deeper into some of that in a moment, but I want to bring in Chef Hannes Tinnecher, who joins me here in the studio. Now, you've heard what the scientists have said there. What's your view of all of this?
I think if I can show you now.
Yep, absolutely.
Which I'm using as well.
Some meats with us. This is something of an inside story.
Exactly.
First here.
I brought some salami, beef salami. It's cured. I brought bresaola. It's beef bresaola, which will be used for pizza, for salads, as well for maybe risotto. You can use it a lot of things, you know. So the thing is, if this is already harmful for people, then I don't know, you know, how will this be affecting the cooking industry?
Sure. Yeah. Is it something that worries you as a chef?
Definitely, yes. Definitely. And I'm thankful, of course, that the scientists make these things, you know, but the thing is, it will be changing a lot in our industry. And we have here as well the fresh meat.
Right, so those are the processed meats, and these are the whole meats.
Different one, dried, cured, as well hot. No? Then we have here the beef strip loin and beef steak. And this is on the menus on each restaurant, actually, you know. So every people or every customer who's coming will order maybe a steak. Maybe afterwards he will order it not anymore grilled. Maybe you have to order it poached or slow oven roasted, or not roasted, maybe only 60 degrees in the oven. So it will change everything. It's changing already. We have already.
Indeed, and we heard in the introduction there, Chef Hannes, about how some of these meats are not always the healthiest thing if you eat too much of them. But as with everything, it's always best to have it in moderation. But there's a difference as well in how you prepare the meat and how you cook it. Just talk to us about that a little bit.
Definitely, yes. I mean, like processed, it's as well processed. If I take now a beef knuckle and make a beef goulash or a beef stroganoff, something like this, because I add some things and I cook it. So it's processed as well, yes or no, I don't know. But it's about this, what the chefs put inside as well, which additives they put. So from my point of view, a grilled steak is still good. Of course, I know some people like it blackened even. This is not so good, actually. But the thing is, you can make it deep fried, which is as well not healthy because it's in the oil. So steaks must be actually grilled to have the best flavor. And a little bit of fat on, it's I think is well okay. You know, poached is the possibility to get away from the grilling. You know, to heat it up too high. You know.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to some of that in a moment, but if I could just turn back to Dr. Strafe then. Just explain to us why a processed, there was a distinction made in your findings between processed meats and red meats. The processed meats were more harmful. Just explain to us that difference, why they're more harmful.
Well, just for clarification, it's not necessarily more harmful. It is that we know now more that it causes cancer in humans, and this is about what we call the first question: can it cause cancer in humans? And it is really up to this group of experts to look at all the published literature and then to decide how to best phrase the evaluation. And they felt that it's best to make the distinction, depending on the available literature, between the red meat and the processed meat. Now, for the processed meat, where they have clearly concluded that we now know it can cause cancer in humans, it is different ways of processing the meat. That includes curing, salting, fermentation, smoking, and the like. And these are typically assessed together in these epidemiological studies that consistently came to the conclusion that there is an increased risk of colorectal cancer. I want to add that this is a relatively small risk, but it's a clear link with the increased risk.
Dr. Saunders, I know you want to give your take on some of that, and I want to ask you as well about the fact that there are some people can eat processed meat and die of other things, and other people can contract cancer without ever touching bacon or beef. I mean, we've got to put that into all of this discussion as well, haven't we?
An important perspective, I mean, the sort of rough estimate that we talk about is that roughly a third of cancers are probably preventable by some sort of modification of risk. So by that we mean modifying lifestyle, things like smoking, exercise, good diet, controlling obesity, controlling alcohol intake. All of these things are known to increase cancer risk, some more than others. And so the rough estimate is that we could probably get rid of about a third of cancers, or prevent about a third of cancers, by following all of these guidelines. Now, there's a flip side to that coin, is that means that 2/3 of cancers are not really preventable, and they're just down to genetic bad luck, essentially. Now, that shouldn't dilute the message that this sort of work is important, but I really think that what's often lost in the reporting around this is that, you know, we're talking about a relative risk here that's relatively small compared to most of the other things that are mentioned alongside. I mean, I even saw reporting today that plutonium was in the same risk category. Now, it is, but that doesn't mean that the relative risk is the same from exposure to plutonium or processed meat.
All right, it's also important. I want to get your view on this first, Dr. Saunders, because it's important to know as well how the animal itself has been fed and how that affects the meat that comes to your table.
So I think in terms of processed meat particularly, what seems to be the problem is that the chemicals that are involved in the curing process or the smoking process, they're nitrogen-based chemicals, and they seem to have, there's certainly some evidence at a mechanistic level, that they seem to have an effect on the cells that line your gut. They do different things. Some of them tend to form these kind of chemical modifications of the DNA inside your cells, and that can lead directly to mutations or mistakes in the genome. And every now and then one of these mistakes will hit a particularly important gene and will cause the cell to start to grow, and that's in effect what causes a tumour to start in the first place. So there's some mechanistic link there. There's also a suggestion that the different chemicals in processed meat particularly, and also in barbecued or deep fried red meat, might influence the gut flora, so the different bacteria that live in our gut. They might affect the microenvironment that they're living in, and that could also alter the way that these cells behave and grow within the gut lining. So there is definitely some mechanistic evidence there, although you know, animal studies, and I note that this was noted in the two-page summary that was published today, that the animal studies, the conclusions are hard to draw. The mechanistic link is not direct, and we don't have a really clear understanding yet of how this is happening.
So, Chef Hannes, how does all this affect how we cook our meat, or how we should cook our meat, and whether more people or less people are going to come to your restaurant?
I think so. Yeah, this is the thing which will happen maybe in the future, that the people will ask more for slow cooked, or maybe alto sham cooked, or poached. Poached is one of the very healthy ones of the way of preparing meat. But what about the burger? The burger industry, not my restaurant now, but burger restaurants, they will be affected.
Sure.
Yeah.
And in terms of how you when you select the meat that you do for cooking, how much do you know about where it's come from, what's in it? How does that affect your decision?
Okay. We know where it comes from which area. Like I buy from New Zealand, Australia, the beef now here in Doha, Qatar, and we know who is the producer. When is it slaughtered, when is it packed, and how long is on the way to us. This we know. We don't know how it's fed. This we don't know. So, like in Austria, it's easier. In Austria, where I come from, you get it from the farmer around you. You know, you can buy it from there in the good restaurants. So here, you have to buy what you get. You know, so it's a little bit different here.
All right, I want to show you a graphic now that hopefully puts some of this in a bit more perspective. The World Health Organization saying processed meat can cause cancer, but it recognizes as well that other carcinogenic substances put people at a much higher risk of getting cancer. Tobacco remains the biggest killer, with 1 million deaths every year linked to smoking. Compare that to the 34,000 deaths a year that are linked to diets heavy in processed meat. Drinking alcohol puts people at risk of cancer, with 600,000 dying every year. But even walking outside your door can be detrimental, with 200,000 deaths a year linked to air pollution. So, Dr. Strafe, if I can turn back to you on this, I don't know if you've seen much of the reporting on these findings that your group put together, but and I touched on this earlier, there's been a lot of these kind of screaming headlines, and that perhaps people have overreacted to this a bit. What do you think of the way people have reacted to this, and are we making too much of what you've put out there?
I think today we have a good discussion on what that means, and we try to be very clear in our communication in the Lancet Oncology summary report, as well in our press release and the questions and answers. So it's more a certain type of journalists that try to make it sensational. It is not us. It is clear that there is an increased risk of cancer from the epidemiological studies, and this needs to be taken up by governmental agencies, other international bodies, to take that into their account when they come up with dietary recommendations. But this is also nothing completely new, because there has already been strong recommendations to reduce the intake of red meat or processed meat for other health outcome reasons, like cardiovascular diseases or diabetes. What's new is that there is now a clear link with at least one type of cancer, and at the same time we must know that from what we know today, the risk is not very high. And so this is then up to the individual that can decide if they want to reduce their intake of processed meat.
All right, so Dr. Saunders, when someone looks at this and they say, I'm not bothered by any of this, I love my steaks and my bacon sandwiches and I'm going to stick to that regardless. Are they right to think that?
No, they're not. I mean, clearly the recommendations are there and they have been around for a while, as Kurt said, to reduce intake of processed meat particularly, but also red meat. But I think really the screaming headlines, if you like, have kind of set up a little bit of a false impression in a lot of people's minds. I mean, you know, if we can use some numbers, the graphic you were showing earlier, put it into a nice context. Another way to think about it is that there's a roughly 18% risk increase with high consumption, so that's more than 50 grams a day of processed meat. And Kurt can speak to this probably better than I can, but to put that into some perspective, that's kind of the difference between if you took a population of people eating not very much processed meat, you would say that around 55 out of 1,000 of those people would develop cancer related to that consumption. Compare that to what you consider a high consumption of processed meat, that number would increase by 10 people per 1,000 of population. So I think it's really important to put this kind of risk in terms that people can understand in an everyday way. And you know, there's a lot of evidence out there that a lot of reporting, particularly health reporting and particularly reporting around diet and cancer, relies heavily on the information provided in the press release. So most reporting simply regurgitates or expands slightly on the press release. And so I think there's a real responsibility on Kurt and his colleagues, and the press release today was okay, but I think there's a real responsibility on them to really provide some context and some very clear numbers to help out the journalists that are doing the reporting around this.
Chef Hannes, what's your view on this? Are people overreacting to this, do you think?
I hope they don't overreact on it, because otherwise maybe it really affects my restaurant immediately if they react now, you know. If they say, no, I don't want a steak anymore, I don't want a burger anymore, I don't want it grilled, so I have to teach my people as well different. All of the staff needs to be trained different. And this must come then actually from now or maybe a little bit later. Maybe we have to wait for that, but definitely we have to do something.
Of course, there's an economic dimension to
definitely
this for someone like yourself, but also in terms of the price difference between processed meats, which are a lot cheaper than the whole meats that you showed us there earlier. I mean,
definitely, yes.
Is that going to affect the way people consume their meat?
I think so, yes, and this is a two-class already then, you know, because the processed meat, you can afford a steak maybe from $40, let's say $8 or something, a beef tenderloin, or you can buy it for $30, you know what I mean, per kg. So the thing is, this is already existing, that people with more money, they have better quality, and they get as well better quality.
Yeah, Dr. Saunders, what's your view on the economic aspect of this? The fact that processed meats, which are generally considered more harmful, are much cheaper than the whole meats, the steaks, and so on, and that's going to affect people's decisions on what they consume.
Look, that's clearly a consideration, and we know that particularly obesity, which has a much higher risk factor for cancer, is heavily dependent on socioeconomic factors and the availability of cheap, healthy food. I guess something I'd say to the chef is do you think people would change their perception of red meat or processed meat if they knew that the red wine they were probably drinking alongside their meal, possibly the cigarettes they might smoke, or the fact that they drove a car instead of walking to the restaurant is probably going to have more risk long-term in their likelihood of getting cancer than the meat they might eat with their dinner?
Yeah, Chef Hannes, when you put that into perspective, it might worry you a little bit less, perhaps.
Yeah, I am definitely not worried less.
All right, we're going to have to bring this to a close. We could spend a lot longer talking about this, but unfortunately we're out of time. I guess the lesson from all of this is you can keep eating those burgers and steaks and so on, but just keep it in moderation, I guess. Thanks very much, all three of you, for being on with us. On Inside Story, Dr. Strafe in Lyon, Dr. Saunders in Sydney, and Chef Tennecher in Doha. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments to us on the program's page of our website, aljazeera.com, and you can post your views to us on Facebook. We're on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And we're on Twitter as well. You can tweet us at AJ Inside Story is the handle. Thanks for watching. From me, Hazem Sika, and all the team here. Bye for now.